You ever notice how even a little ripple in a still pond can kind of catch your eye?
Hmm. Yeah.
That's Bitcoin for me, I swear. Even the tiniest price movement. It's like a little signal flare, you know? Especially in a market where every whisper seems to echo around the globe. It makes you want to dig a little deeper and see what's really going on.
Absolutely. I bet some of you listening might have noticed that little Bitcoin bump we saw recently.
Yeah.
And maybe some folks just shrugged it off, but that's what we're here for, right? To help you see those subtle market forces that are at work, kind of like peeking behind the curtain. So we're going to look back at what happened, starting around Friday, March 21st, to unpack why this seemingly small rise could actually be telling us a bigger story.
Right, because back then, the overall mood, especially with everything happening in the traditional markets, it felt like Bitcoin was headed for a dip.
It really did.
Yeah.
And to see why that expectation was so strong, we got to zoom out and look at the bigger economic picture. The sources we've been digging into really highlight the pressure the U.S. stock markets were facing.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit. The big elephant in the room was all the uncertainty around Trump's foreign trade policies. I mean, that was casting quite a shadow, wasn't it?
Big time.
Yeah.
If you look at the S&P 500, think of it like a health check for major U.S. companies. It had been on a downward slide since, roughly February 20th. Finally hitting a low point around March 13th. There was a tiny bounce back around March 14th, but the feeling was those trade policies were going to drag the market down again that Friday.
Gotcha. So it sounded like Friday was going to be a rough ride, just mirroring the jitters in the stock market. But, and this is where it gets really interesting, that expected downturn, it didn't actually happen.
Nope, not at all. It's almost like the market hit pause. The source calls it lateralization, meaning the price is kind of just moving sideways, no strong trends up or down.
So a holding pattern.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember, this sideways movement was still happening below the price levels we saw back on March 7th, which was the last really good day before that big drop.
Right, so while things weren't plummeting, it wasn't exactly a party either.
Exactly. And here's where Bitcoin starts to break away from the pack. Because while those traditional exchanges clock out for the weekend, Bitcoin's always on, isn't it?
Always.
And that's where we see this interesting split between those traditional assets and Bitcoin. On Friday, Bitcoin's price just kind of mirrored the stillness in the U.S. markets. Saturday was much the same, stable. But then Sunday rolls around, and things start to get a little lively.
Sunday. The source mentions a little bump. Bitcoin edging up from around $83,800 to over $85,000. Not a huge jump, but it hints that something was brewing within the crypto market itself.
Right, it's like a little whisper of anticipation, and that whisper got a bit louder overnight into Monday. Bitcoin pushed even higher, breaking above $87,000. And the key takeaway here is, all of this happened before the U.S. markets even woke up.
So this weekend climb, however small, it wasn't just Bitcoin reacting to the stock market. It points to something happening within the crypto world, right?
Absolutely. And the source gives us a big clue. Less Bitcoin being offered up for sale on those crypto exchanges. They call it a decrease in BTC selling pressure.
Makes sense.
But here's what's really interesting. That selling pressure was already pretty low to begin with. And over that weekend, it seems like it hit levels close to the absolute bottom we've seen in this market cycle. Maybe even the one before it.
Wow. So basically, fewer people were looking to sell their Bitcoin. Makes sense. If the supply on exchanges shrinks, even a little buying interest can give the price a nudge, right?
Exactly. Supply and demand always at play. It suggests a shift in sentiment, even if it's subtle. Less desire to sell, which means even a bit of buying can have a bigger impact.
Gotcha. So Bitcoin flexes its independent muscles a bit. What does the source say about the near future? What might be coming next?
Well, in the short term, the source is pointing to a potential period of low volatility. They actually call it tired lateralization, which they think could last until around the end of April.
Tired lateralization. Sounds like the market needs a nap. But the source also throws in a pretty big what if, right?
Oh, they definitely do. They're careful to point out that this whole picture could change pretty quickly, especially with those low levels of buying and selling we just talked about. Any unexpected news, any big event, that delicate balance could tip in a heartbeat.
And then there's the U.S. stock market still lurking in the background, and all the uncertainty with Trump's tariffs. The source suggests that maybe, just maybe, the stock market's correction, the one driven by those tariff fears, might be running out of steam.
Yeah, it's a possibility they bring up. And there's a lot of focus on April 2nd, because that's when most of those tariffs are set to kick in. The market's basically holding its breath to see what happens.
April 2nd, mark it on your calendars, folks. So the big question is, will those tariffs go full steam ahead, or are they more of a bargaining chip in trade negotiations? Either way, it could send ripples through all the markets.
For sure. All this uncertainty makes it tough to predict any strong moves in the near future. Hence the tired lateralization idea.
So short term, watchful waiting.
Mm.
But what about the bigger picture, the medium term? What does the source see down the road?
They think once we get into the first half of April, things should become a bit clearer. That'll give us a better idea of what to expect in the following months. There's been some talk about markets picking up steam again towards the end of April, but the source also points out that these uncertain times often drag on until June.
June's starting to sound like a potential turning point, isn't it?
It often is in situations like this. Now, if we focus specifically on Bitcoin, the source says a massive price crash, like way below $75,000, that's becoming less likely. Actually, they think Bitcoin might even get close to that $75,000 mark fairly soon.
Interesting. So a dip towards $75,000 is on the table, but a full-blown crash seems less probable. And then beyond June, the mood seems a bit brighter.
Yeah, there's a pretty common, though not universal, belief that the market could bounce back after June. Some folks, the more optimistic ones, they're even talking about Bitcoin reaching new all-time highs by the end of the year.
New all-time highs by year's end. Now that would be a plot twist. It really puts those little price movements we've been dissecting into perspective, doesn't it? They might be early hints of a bigger story unfolding.
It's all about connecting the dots, right? Even these tiny blips on the Bitcoin radar, they can tell us a lot, especially when they happen while the traditional markets are asleep. It shows us the unique dynamics within the crypto world.
It highlights how much is still unknown, how much is driven by global economics and, those big geopolitical forces like the whole trade policy saga.
It's a complex interplay, crypto-specific stuff, global trends, and even those unexpected global events we talked about. They all feed into the mix.
Absolutely. So to wrap things up, here's something for you to ponder. If the market does rebound after June, if Bitcoin does reach new highs before 2025 is over, what do you think will be the driving forces behind such a big shift? Think about what's happening in the crypto world, yes, but also those wider economic tides, any potential surprises on the global stage. It's a fascinating puzzle, and even these seemingly small pieces can help us see the bigger picture.
Sometimes it's those subtle details that give us the most valuable insights.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for having me.
As always, a pleasure. Until next time, folks, stay curious.